So this is a reading presentation, like I said, week 11 for CLS 1500. The first thing, we're going to go ahead and talk about is kind of vocabulary, just to, the deeper we get into these things, the more or the easier it'll be to kind of go into discussion using these terms. So the first one is transformational resistance. This one is just kind of like, if you have this motivation or like this desire to kind of change and have social transformation and look at, what the dominant groups or culture are doing to, oppress minority or subordinate groups, like you'll begin to critique those systems. Like you'll be able to look into it and be like, hey, this isn't right. When it comes to agencies of transformational resistance, or sometimes you'll see me refer to it as ATR. These are just mainly groups that, they kind of developed in order to create more agents of resistance. So to create movements, to create just more talk on a lot of these oppressions that many of these minority groups will go through. A side term, adultist. So this is usually when, and I'm sure we've all done this, where our age will be our credibility. And we may be like completely wrong, but because we're an adult, automatically we're wiser than those that are younger than us, the youth, the upcoming generation. But usually it's the younger generation that creates change. They're usually the ones that have the energy to do the movements, protests, even take, the pepper sprays and the rubber bullets and things like that. So, that is something that we have to kind of be aware of the older we get, is to, have that not have that adultist mentality. And then you have consciousness. So, this is, and it says here, the process of becoming aware of the ways that power is abused to create relationships of privilege and oppression in multiple divisions. So for me, I think, the more I took classes on that relate to social injustice and kind of just looking back at my own life, I did see a lot more things. I was like, huh. And I believe that's the experience of consciousness, is just, kind of taking a step back and analyzing all of these obstacles and things that we may have been put through, whether it's because of our sexual orientation or, the racial or ethnic group that we're a part of, or things like that. It's just, just becoming aware of that. Some of the 5 elements of ATR. These I might kind of just run through them a little bit. But the ATR, as we explained, earlier, it's just organizations that help develop resistance and things like that, which we'll talk about further. So this would be raising a multidimensional and critical consciousness. So, kind of developing people to have, sorry, this chair is like cutting off my circulation. It's just kind of raising that awareness within people, to critique a lot of these powers and analyze these dimensions that affect subordinate groups, nurture and commitment to social justice. So say I'm the head of an organization, and I collect a bunch of sophomores and juniors from a high school or even a college, from whatever I've learned, I'm sure I would want to pass that down and mold and, help them kind of be agents of change and understand where or how we can begin to attack some of these ideologies that oppress other groups. And then, number 3 is kind of that develop skills and expand resources. So obviously, if I have a lot of resources, say within Cal State LA, and some of these younger students in high schools or things like that don't, I would definitely want to use some of those resources to help guide their journey. 4, create and maintain an inclusive community. So always, if we're going to be conscious, we shouldn't just be conscious of our own obstacles, but be conscious of others' obstacles and kind of go into the intersectional dimensions of things, which we'll also talk about later. And then create and evolve a network of resistance. So obviously, developing those agents of change, finding more agents of change, kind of helping each other with the resources and developing numbers and things like that. This is still within vocab. So one of the things we'll talk about is Pala, and this was in the reading. Professor Covarrubias, he kind of mentioned this group as one of his lead points of discussion. And so this would be the Public Allies of Los Angeles, which this group does exactly what we've just mentioned in the 5 points of ATR, which is, training young activists and, help develop their skills and understand just kind of where they, what direction they can go to become conscious of themselves, of the social injustice that goes on in this country, and, how we can be leaders of change. And so that's what PALA does is it nurtures them into becoming these new leaders of these new movements. You also have critical multidimensional consciousness, which is, it goes to what I mentioned earlier, critiques intersection of power relationships. So, I can be, for me, for example, I am both Nicaraguense and Salvadorian, and I'm also a male, and for these reasons, I have had problems with people kind of looking down on my race, including how my countries are portrayed in United States literature, and we're usually portrayed as savages or people that went against, the United States and rebelled, and when it comes to my sex, or my gender, I'm sorry, I have, based on the expectation of United States culture, there was a lot of pressure put on me on fulfilling certain social roles that didn't align with my cultural identity. So if we were to go ahead and look at, multidimensional consciousness, we would put those 2 in factor, or, if I'm trying to help another person that is a female Muslim, that happens to be Cuban, I'm going to have to look at, all the different factors that contribute to her experiences and the oppression that she may be going through on, multiple levels. So you also have community memory. This is kind of lessons passed down with communities. And I'm sure a lot of us have kind of understand that, I know for me, it was like, hey, everybody has to go inside before the street lights come on. And the reason why is because after that, pretty much trouble was around. And, you could either be stopped by the police, and me personally, I've been patted down for no reason, just because I fit the description, and stripped of my clothes and stuff. And it was after the street lights were off. So the community and the memory of the community kind of already gave me some of that wisdom that obviously I didn't abide by at that time. But it was in good conscience so that I can avoid those experiences, You also have the ABCD perspective, which is an asset-based approach. So this kind of views like a bunch of people to have different talents or gifts that will contribute to the community. So if I'm an artist and I want to talk about social injustices, maybe I can paint on the wall, obviously with the permission of business owners, certain murals that kind of evoke inspiration to challenge current social constructs and things like that. B would be clients of service. So, this would be the leaders of communities kind of coming together and figuring out like, hey, well, what's going on with our education system? What's going on with the school to jail pipeline between, or within minority communities, and kind of just providing that service. You also have service and change efforts that need to be acceptable to those who live with the results. So I can't, basically I can't create these changes and then they really don't provide any suitable or noticeable changes that affect the community. So, I may change, I don't know, certain posters from being prohibited, but how's that, although it can be helping the community, how is it substantially helping the community as opposed to me saying, hey, we need more teachers in this community because we have, a shortage of teachers and for that reason. So this one is raising a multidimensional consciousness, and it's kind of a little bit more vocab, but then we're going to go into more like facts from the reading as well from Covarrubias. And for this would be collaborative leadership. So this is like, and it may sound weird or unorthodox. It could be like Republicans and Democrats coming together to fight a common problem, and they have opposing perspectives, but they come together to, I don't know, fight environmental issues. Or, maybe they both acknowledge, hey, this community is being tormented for these reasons, or they need to be considered for these reasons. So, this is what we call collaborative leadership, and, it's very essential for change, some quick facts. I didn't even know this, and this is pretty cool. So yeah, people of color make up the majority of students in California, but that they're more segregated than civil rights times, which is, pretty crazy. If you look at some of the schools, you'll see, there'll be a lot of Latino and African-American students in one school and then whites in another school. And, it kind of goes back to media doesn't talk about this. So this is something that we have to talk about, because within those schools, there's a lot of push out rates. There's a lot of crime, there's a lot of, or lack of resources within the Latino and African-American schools and communities. And, it all is connected to one another. Lack of education, lack of resources can push out some of these students, or can, lead them to lives of crime due to poverty and other circumstances. Push out rates and pathways to incarceration for people of color are extremely high, and we've known that for a while now. We've known that for decades, that African Americans and Latinos make up most of the prison system, the population, according to population size. I know I've heard some people say, no, there's way more white people in jails. And so I always have to remind them it's according to population. And, African Americans are the most targeted population that has, males in general, African American males in jail. And then right after that, it's Latino males, and if we know anything about sampling, like I said, it goes to according to population size, and it's substantial. It does not make sense how a lot of minority groups are being targeted and given way worse sentences for the same crimes that their white male counterparts are committing. Unemployment is at an all-time high, and yeah, kind of like mentioned earlier, access to healthy food options is terrible. Intersectionality, so I did mention that earlier, but yeah, we're going to go through it a little bit more. So the direct vocabulary for that would be: injustice can't be analyzed through one lens, but requires multiple lenses, such as lenses that look through race, gender, class, and more. So for the refugees, this was from week 6, by the way. The refugees from El Salvador were refused the status of asylum and citizenship, and were eventually portrayed as illegal immigrants, dangerous illegal immigrants at that, immigrants that were, gang members from MS-13, or, rebels that were fighting in the war. And although they were, in a sense, promised like citizenship and, even a positive label, a lot of them, like I said, they were discarded. They were termed illegal migrants, in which we had our media go ahead and portray them as something that was evil. And so that's where we need ATR to be like, they wanted out, they needed help. All this that stirred up from our political involvement as a country of the United States, and without groups kind of fighting for their rights and, bringing awareness, this would continue to happen at the level that it did during that time. You do have the term whiteness. So this leads to racism, prejudice, and discrimination. So, it's usually like, if you think of like Aryan belief holders or Nazi belief holders, it's usually, hey, white is pure, white is like the best, dominant, like white should be everywhere, and that's kind of what whiteness kind of goes into is only showing the positive attributes and basically trying to give an excuse to dominate other cultures or subordinate groups for the sake of being white. Assimilations that kind of laid the foundation. And assimilation, if you don't remember, it's when one kind of conforms to the dominant group of that society, and almost everything changes about them, their identity, their culture, their cultural values, their beliefs. And even being within those in groups, they're still most of the time considered individuals were assimilated once they got here, because they were either declined by their host land and not accepted by I guess you would say their communities in some sense, and so then they would go ahead and conform to the dominant society, and then lastly, from week 7, we do have Black people continue to be racialized and treated unfairly, especially by the media, laws, systems. Still the highest minority group to be incarcerated, still among Latinos, both groups are still among the highest killed by police, and all of these things that we're bringing up, they all go back to these organizations and kind of just creating these agents of change and creating these students of resistance to bring awareness and question all of these things, so that all of these people that are mentioned that are affected can live a better life, or at least their children can, and future generations can, and so that's why this is super important. And it's super important to kind of look back at what we already learned and see, wow, yeah, if there is no agents of change, we wouldn't have known of all these things. We wouldn't have known of all of these different statistics that gave us credible information on, bringing awareness of the oppression of these groups. So now we're going to go into critical race theory. So that I want to give you a direct definition. It's transformational resistance and social. Well, this is from the articles of transformational resistance and social justice. So first and foremost, I wanted to bring up the two main forms of or examples of resistance that were in the readings. So you have the East Los Angeles walkouts in 1968. So this one was mainly about the fact that a lot of Latinx students felt they were not getting enough or the best education, like they were getting inferior education, and they knew it, and in a sense, this, or actually in a clear format, this was, whiteness at its finest, trying to oppress, Latinx communities and keep them educationally inferior, especially with the system set up. You go to college, generally is supposed to be seen as getting a higher income. And with this case, a lot of these students, they weren't getting the education as their white counterparts. And so that's where the swap came in. They demanded that they got better education, that they got better staff, smaller classrooms and things like that, And then you have the UCLA Chicano studies protest. So that one was about the fact that the chancellor of the school did not want to approve of expanding Chicano studies, and for that reason, they believed that it was a precursor to, kind of reducing Chicano studies, Chicano studies. And, at that point, the students created resistance and they created a protest in which they went into the faculty center, protested there. They ended up fasting. And then other schools and other teachers from other areas got involved, and this brought awareness to it. It brought awareness to the oppression that was going on, or that was being attempted to happen. So now this is critical race theory, and this is, I'm going to give you the direct definition for this. So it's race and gender consciousness framework. This theory aims to challenge the dominant discourse. So there are 5 themes. You do have the centrality of race and racism and intersectionality with other forms of subordination, the challenge of dominant ideology, which is what we kind of spoke of earlier, the commitment to social justice, centrality of experimental knowledge, and interdisciplinary perspective. So you do have this little picture that I ended up finding, and it pretty much shows what it tackles. You know, what critical race theory aims to challenge in a way. You know, and that goes with academic, social issues, policies, government policies, um, different political backgrounds. You know, whether you're Republican or liberal, debates, education, things like that. Um, and the main part that I really like about critical race theory is the fact that it says a commitment to social justice. So, you know, it's in its own definition, in its own theme, letting you know, like, hey, this theory is for change. It's for change for people that are oppressed. It's for change for people that are marginalized, and it is it's a theory that many can use as a tool to create change. So it's pretty cool. It's also transdisciplinary. So, you know, that's the cool thing, is that you can use, you know, things from sociology, from psychology, from medical sciences, you know, and other disciplines to kind of look at the different, you know, racial like oppressions or things that are in need of social justice, that need to have awareness so that people aren't having a terrible time in this life and in this world. And so it brings all these knowledges together so that we're able to create that change. Now here's the 4 types of student oppositional behavior. So I'm sure we've all, you know, for the most part, enacted at least 3, if not all of these different forms of oppositional behaviors within, you know, our time in elementary school, middle school, high school, and college. So you have reactionary behavior, self-defeating resistance, conformist resistance, and transfunctional resistance. So what do you call? You also have 2 resistance intersectional dimensions, which you know, students either have to have a critique of social oppression, or students must have an interest in social justice. So reactionary behavior would be unaware of resistance and does not, you know, so you're just acting out in class. You're not really understanding, you know, what you're fighting for. You just don't like what's going on for you personally. You have self-defeating resistance. So, you know, you'll fight like the school, you know, and you'll kind of be like, hey, I don't like the way, you know, or what I've noticed, you know, but you're not really fighting for social justice. You're not fighting for all like marginalized groups in schools and trying to get them rights, you know. Then you have conformist resistance, so need for social justice, but no critique for social oppression. So, you know, you kind of not aware, but you're aware, but you blame yourself, like, well, you know, I didn't get that job because, you know, maybe I just didn't have the best personality. You know, maybe I didn't have the right clothes. You know, maybe it's me rather than it's you being, you know, an African American female or a Latino from East Los Angeles. Like, most likely that was the reason why they, you know, we have data to back that up, why certain persons don't get hired due to their ethnic background. You know, you do have transfunctional resistance, which you notice both. You notice that you need to, you know, critique social oppression, and students must have an interest in social justice. So, you know, you're like, you know what, I don't like the way I feel. And matter of fact, I noticed that a lot of people in my ethnic background or my circumstance are going through the same thing, and maybe they're, you know, going through the same thing in other schools. So I don't like this. We're going to go ahead and fight for everybody's rights in this particular subject. All right, so you have internal resistance and external resistance. So you conform to institutional and cultural expectations, but believes in both the critique of social oppression and want for social justice. So this looks like you becoming a doctor, and, you know, you're, I don't know, an Asian person, due to the fact that a lot of our doctors are white and Asian. You may feel, oh, well, I need to go ahead and be white and Asian, but I know that I want to fight for the fact that why aren't there other minority groups that are given the same opportunity to be a doctor, et cetera. And so you'll still fulfill the expectation, but you still know, like, hey, I do want social justice in some format. And, you know, I do want to bring awareness to that. Now, external resistance is quite opposite. You're blatant about it. You're like, hey, what's going on here? And, you know, you question the dominant culture or group directly, and you're pretty vocal about it, you know, and you don't go with the cultural expectations and things like that. So wanted to discuss, I don't know if you guys got a chance to see the Zoot Suit. It shows a lot of the fact that, you know, especially Chicanos and Chicanas, but they created a identity, you know, that allowed them to, you know, kind of develop their own culture within the United States. And they were eventually portrayed by the media as deviants, criminals, Mexican crime wave. You know, they were oppressed, beaten, lynched. There's a TV show, it's called Penny Dreadful, and there's a season that literally is dedicated to bringing up the oppression of Chicanos and Chicanas and other groups, minority groups. But yeah, you know, the Zoot Suit was not just a style of dressing, but a form of resistance, to white culture, you know, and American culture, that attempted to create, you know, make them into subordinates or people that, you know, either conformed or were sent out, you know, to jail and stuff. And so the Zoot Suit was very important. It was very important in creating an identity and maintaining that identity and resisting, um, you know, those obstacles that were presented. So if you did get to see it, awesome. If you didn't, check it out. And like I said, also look at Penny Dreadful. Really good season, a lot of history. So you do have educational disparities. So this is more so about statistics. You know, this goes about, you know, the fact that only 1.2 and 1.7 of Latino or Latinx and African American students have doctoral degrees compared to their white counterparts and Asian counterparts, which is between 4.7 and 8.7 students end up with doctoral degrees. When it comes to what do you call it, being pushed out of high school, 37% of Latinx students are normally pushed out of high school. 16%, the next highest number would be African Americans, and 33% of, you know, of both ethnic groups are arrested for drugs. Those are some of the highest numbers compared to the other ethnic groups in this country. And when it comes to wealth, Latinos and African Americans are both, what do you call, at the bottom of the list. And it's a huge gap. It's at least $60,000 to $70,000 gap in which whites and Asians have a much higher wealth, I guess, savings and income compared to Latinos and African Americans. And then lastly, I did want to, you know, remind us of week 5, how, you know, only 1% of Latino actors are casted as lead roles, which, you know, it's not just about, you know, their career choice, but it also goes back to economy and you know, creating wealth and I guess you could say awareness to the communities that they come from. It's censoring them, you know, and it's affecting the communities. And it goes same thing for African American groups. You know, for a long time, both groups were ridiculed, laughed at, seen as you know, either deviants or clowns, and not given roles, lead roles at least, that, you know, had a substantial effect on audiences. So that's something I wanted to kind of compare to some of these statistics and how all of these, you know, are multidimensional and they connect. You do have the educational disparity theory, so deficit thinking. It's basically blames the victim rather than examining schools and stuff like that. Biogenetic deficit, which is, you know, basically the school system perpetuates society's inequalities. And then you have cultural reproduction. Schools validate, normalize, and reproduce the cultural norms of society. And then lastly, you know, how do we, you know, or what are the solutions to critiquing these oppressive systems, you know, and a large part of that goes with addressing segregation and modern segregation, looking at, you know, cultural education and seeing how we can include minority history, you know, Latinx, African American, other religious backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds and things like that, and how they tie into United States history. You know, this includes looking at funding and educational programming within our communities, and, you know, teachers, how much, like I said, how what we went mentioned before was the lack of teachers or staff that we have in some of these communities and their schools, and kind of just bringing awareness to that. And then lastly, it includes protesting and resisting and seeking social justice, as CRT intended, and CRT being critical race theory, just to remind you. And this is the only way we'll create true change. So, yeah, I just want to go ahead and mention that to you guys. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation. This was a great week. Really enjoyed these readings. And there's our reference pages. So awesome. I will talk to you guys later.